welcome to another tutorial video. So today's one is a tutorial using showcase number 33, which is the Heart and Hexagon split box die sets. And I'm not sure if you're going to get them in two A5 sets or whether it's all going to be on one A4 sheet, but each box is basically contained within an A5 sort of sized die set. And you've got the Hexagon version, which allows you to create a box like this, which is a beautiful hexagonal shape with all of the decorations on there, and it actually splits open to reveal a box inside there as well. In the full up-close video, I will untie these and show you exactly what they look like, but the idea is that they split open in the middle and there's a smaller hexagon box inside there that you can then put your gift in or make it into some kind of cool interactive kind of gift as well. That's what the Hexagon one creates, and that is the die set to create the Hexagon one. Those are all of the different elements that are in there. And then this is the die set to create the heart split box, which gives you a box that looks like this. And on this one you actually have a different option for a closure mechanism. You can definitely use this one on the Hexagon box as well, and you could also use the Hexagon boxes one on the heart one, but you don't have the panel sort of going around the area of the design, if you know what I mean. This one actually had a cutout portion in the panel, whereas the heart you might just have to like layer your panel onto another solid piece of card and then put those pieces underneath. But you could definitely use that as a closure mechanism on this one as well. And the idea is the same, that it is split down the middle. You prise the two pieces apart and you've got that heart-shaped box on the inside to put your gift in. They're a really cool idea though. I think they're a really different kind of box, and I don't know what die set it was now, but I don't know where the piece of paper is either. It was on my desk for a while. I jotted down an idea after making a tonic die set for something, and I wrote down, could you make an oval kind of box and you could turn it into a ladybird and it would open like this. So I don't know if the designer of the dies had seen like the same die set and had the same kind of idea, but you could turn this one into a ladybird, I reckon. I know it would be a little bit of a geometric ladybird, but you know, making the top little bit here black and then having the two wings with the red and then the black spots on it, you could definitely turn it into some kind of bug. You could make it look like a Pac-Man. This one in particular, the Hexagon one, it could be a little Pac-Man that, you know, you could make it move, and you could even make it into a Babybel cheese as well, you know, with the red outside and then a creamy coloured inside. And if you wanted to, you could even like print off a label for it too and have that little Babybel logo on it for a proper cheeseaholic as well. So you could do a funny kind of gift with them too. But there will be a full up-close video showing you those boxes in more detail, another one that I've created, and then lots of cards as well. But this tutorial video, I've already made a Hexagon version of this card, and I want to make a heart version of this card to show you in the video. So it's basically going to be how to create a split aperture shaker card. So I know shaker cards have been around for so many years, and most of you have probably already made a shaker card before or know how to make them, but you might not know how to create a shaker card with two different chambers for different shaker elements inside them. So for this one I've used the golden acer little leaves and then the luminous lily pad hexagons on the other side of them. So there are actually two different shaker elements in there. This one has got a detailed aperture portion, and then this is just an open aperture, and we're going to create a similar idea with the heart one. I was thinking maybe I should do the heart one in the same colours that I did the heart-shaped box, but I have already done a card in these colours that you'll see in that up-close video. So I thought I haven't done any heart-related things using this colour scheme, so I thought I'd go with this colour scheme, which is sea salt green, ginger pie and pistachio craft perfect texture cardstock if you want to recreate something similar. So first of all, for this one, if we're going to create something like this but using the hearts, first of all we're going to need our panel to start off with. Then we're going to take our heart die set out of the packet, and then for the Hexagon one you actually get different options for a hexagon or half hexagon shape. Because of the way they've put all of the dies in the die set, the half hexagon is a separate die, but with the heart one, the heart die that actually cut the main size of the box is actually just like this, that they could just split the heart in half and give you that piece. Because the hexagon one is symmetrical, they can just give you one half of the hexagon, and you can use that to create both sides of the box. But with the heart, because they need to be the different handedness of each other, you actually get the die that's split in half. So the aperture ratio of you know, sort of this size to the decorative size for the heart one is going to be slightly different, because we're going to be using a panel rather than the main piece that creates the box, because we haven't got a half piece just in one die to create an aperture. So we're going to pick one of these half pieces, whichever side you want. I think I'll go with the same side, so we're going to do it on this side. This one I did offset and wonky because of that size difference. You could definitely have just used the layering panel for this aperture on this hexagon one as well, and then you wouldn't have had such a different size difference between the two pieces. But I decided to go for the bigger one so that I could make that skinny little frame to go around it. So I'm going to line up that half on that side, which means I need to pick the other half in the design, and I've got to decide which design do I want to do. You've got one that's got more of like a flower in the centre, or this beautiful lattice. I am partial to that lattice, so I think I'm going to go with that one and just pick out the other half of the design. So we're going to do a similar thing, but actually for this one I want to do something else different to this too. So whereas this one I framed up the bigger aperture here, I think with this one I might do a skinny half heart frame to go around the decorative piece instead, and I'll show you how we can do that as well. So that is our first piece that we've decided there, and if we're thinking about putting that skinny frame around this decorative one, we're going to want to make sure it's slightly further over to the side so that that frame will be able to go around with an even border around it. So I'm just going to eyeball these. If you really wanted to, you could measure it and get them absolutely perfect. I don't mind if things are slightly off, so I do just tend to eyeball things. We're going to stick that one into position and stick this one into position. And that's going to be what we're going to cut into our card to get our apertures. But now we've got to think about the colours of things that we want to use. So I think we're going to want to use maybe that burnt orange ginger pie colour to do the frame again, like I did on the hexagon one. So to do the frame on this one, we're going to need that die that has the split in the middle. So we're actually going to be able to create two frames for this heart, but we're only going to use one of them on the card, I think, unless we decide we feel like it needs the other one as well. But we're just going to cut that first, and then I want the frame to be for this side, so we want the other panel that we're not using to cut an aperture in there to go into this one, so that we can actually cut a separate piece to go around this as a frame. So that will cut us a skinny little half heart frame to go around there. Then rest of the bits and pieces wise, it's deciding, do we want to use the just because sentiment that's in the hexagon half of the die set, or there's also one that says surprise or for you as well. We could do the little for you one, and I'll show you how easy it is to turn that into a little rectangle sentiment, because we actually do have the rectangle die as well that we can use in conjunction with that to turn it into a little rectangular sentiment. So for this, I think I'm going to do the same thing. This one, I did two of the intricate sentiment from white and stacked them on top of each other. So I'm just going to get a scrap of white card and get my scissors, and we can just give us enough card to cut two of those. We are going to have to cut the rectangle and the wording separately. So I think for ease wise, it's probably going to be easier to cut the wording first, and then we'll cut the rectangle around the edge of that after we've already cut the word into the piece of card. So we've got that piece allocated, and then we're also going to want to have little mats and layers for these to go on top of, but because this is just a rectangular shape, we can just cut that with our scissors as well. We don't have to use a die to be able to cut those pieces, so we can decide on the colours for those afterwards. And then the only other thing to decide is, do I just want to do these couple of little strips here, or would I prefer a bigger decorative detail on here? Because with the heart one, because the heart is in two halves rather than, you know, three panels on each side, we could, if we wanted to, cut ourselves a decorative piece to go across the bottom here, maybe using the lighter pistachio colour. and just the straight edged rectangle as well. So whilst we're die cutting, we might as well cut that out just in case we think it's going to work as a nice design element on our card. So if I get a piece of card for that, and then we can put those onto there to cut for this too, and secure them into place with a little bit of low tack tape as well. Just eyeballing to get an even border around the decorative piece and the rectangle. Then we'll keep that third colour of card off to the side, ready for when we've got all of our bits and pieces die cut. So let's bring in our tangerine machine. Okay, then let's cut the main panel first. And what else can we fit on the plate? Let's do one of the sentiments first as well, so that we can cut out a bit of the time with die cutting those. Because my panel is 300 GSM and I'm cutting a decorative piece into it, I'm going to run it through and then come back again, just so it gets a double amount of pressure onto it, just to make sure all of that beautiful detail cuts in really nicely. It's much easier to just double cut it the first time than having to like line the die back up onto it again. And then we've got our little sentiment as well, which we can now take the rectangle, line it up around the edge, and luckily, I think you can probably just tell on camera, you can just about see the edge of the white underneath there, so you can actually get that in the perfect position to give a tiny skinny little white border around the edge of the word. So you can, I think you can tell from up there. In person, I'm sure it's much easier to see exactly where to line that up. And then we also want to poke these pieces out of here. Let me find my pokey tool, so that we can cut a second one, because I feel like this might look nice double stacking it. And if we're cutting a second one, we don't have to bother with the rectangle for the second one, because we can stick that beautifully cut rectangular one on top of this one and trim around the edge as well. So it saves you a step doing it that way too. We can see we've got a beautiful cut pattern into there, so I'll leave that until we've die cut everything else and we can poke all of those pieces out. And then we can put this decorative piece on, and also our heart on here as well. And because this decorative piece is running in this direction on my plates, I'm going to run them through in the portrait fashion rather than the landscape fashion. Okay, so we've got our beautiful sort of decorative panel piece, which usually would wrap around the edge of the heart box, but we're going to use it as a border on our card if we feel like it needs it. That die popped off as I pulled the plate off, but you can see we've got that rectangle. I didn't do a brilliant job of lining it up, so if we wanted a second shot at this, we could go and try and put the rectangle around this one as well, but I don't think that looks too bad, to be honest. It's only like a millimetre or so off, so I am just going to leave it. And then this one we will be able to poke all of the pieces out, and then we'll be able to stick this one directly over the top, line them up, and then trim around the edges to get that double stacked look without having to try and line up that rectangle in exactly the same place again. So we've got those all cut, and then we've also got a half heart, which we might be able to use as a backing piece to one of the apertures if we want to put that colour behind it. But we also have the inner panel piece there and our beautiful skinny little frame as well, which we're going to put around that gorgeous decorative pattern that we cut into our card panel. So let's get rid of all of these pieces, move the machine. Then we can bring our main panel back into view, take off the decorative piece, poke all of those little bits out, and they've cut absolutely perfectly. And then we can have a play and try this little skinny frame on to see what that looks like. I think that works quite nicely going around there. It's a little bit wonky compared to that panel. We could make it more, you know, in line with that panel if we wanted to, and then the decorative detail is more towards the bottom, but I don't mind it being offset. I deliberately did it on the Hexagon one. I quite like that offset look, so I'm going to leave it like that. But actually these bits and pieces that we've got left over, all of these like half hearts and things, if you wanted to, you could then just take these and put them onto another card to create a different design. Or if you had a panel that was maybe a different colour, like this sea salt green, you could put the two different colours on top to create a heart as well. So not only are we creating this card, we've also got some extra pieces there that we could use for a different project or for decorating a box as well, because we could maybe have a white box with the ginger kind of accents and use that as a half panel already for one of your box designs as well. So, you know, you can definitely play around with those extra pieces. But for this, we've got that beautiful skinny frame to go around. Then instead of doing the little strips of card, we've got the option, because we've already die cut this piece, to be able to put this decorative border along the bottom of the card instead of just having those little strips of card. So once we've poked all of the pieces out, we can see what we think that looks like. I do quite like the look of that down there. It nicely balances the beautiful pattern that's in there. We're going to have our sentiment, which is going to be doubled up like that. We can maybe mat this onto a bit of the ginger card maybe, or at some point within the matting of this sentiment, I reckon some of that ginger is going to look nice. And I also think some of the sea salt green would look nice as well, whether we go sea salt green and then a mat of ginger before we put it onto the card, but something along those lines. So if we're going to balance the three colours down here, we can use the two other colours behind these. So we could go for the sea salt green behind the one side of the heart. So we could go that colour behind the solid piece, and then we could have the pistachio green behind the decorative side of the heart as well, to give it a different look, having all three of the colours within there. I think that's going to balance the colours quite nicely. Then we've got to decide what confetti do we want in each. So I quite liked having the more prominent confetti of the pattern, which is the golden acer, in the open one, so you could really see those beautiful leaf designs. And then I think go with the luminous lily pad hexagons on the other side. If you were going to go with this colour scheme that I've used here, I was thinking, I did pick some out just in case I wanted to go with it, but if you wanted to go for more for this colour scheme, I was thinking either the turquoise stars or mermaid parade stars that came out quite a while ago, or possibly the bluebell hearts or the scarlet red hearts as well. Well, all of these have actually been out a very long time, so unless you have those in your stash, I don't think you'd be able to get hold of them. But these ones, I think this was in the Rustic Rose, I think, and then this one was in the Harvest Moon collection. So these might be more readily available, so that's why I thought I'd go with this colour scheme and show you the bits and pieces that I've used. So now we've got everything decided, we've just got to start creating our shaker card for this. So we can leave these decorative elements off to one side until the end, and that kind of thing you can decide more towards the end of making your card. Just because I know what kind of rough layout I want to do on this, I can already decide those bits and pieces, but it's quite nice to get those sort of roughly worked out so that you can balance the rest of the colours across the card as well. So first of all, I'm going to stick that little skinny frame down before it slides off somewhere and we lose it. So I'm just going to use a little bit of adhesive behind this frame, just so that it'll stay nicely in position around that beautiful detail that we have die cut onto the card. Then, for a shaker card, you need your acetate. So you want to flip this over, and we want to take a piece of acetate. I've got some tonic acetate here, which is the heavyweight construction acetate. That bit might just be big enough. You don't necessarily need heavyweight construction. You can definitely use maybe the acetate sheets off of those die sets from this showcase. You could actually just use the acetate from them. If you carefully peel off all of the foam tape and stuff, you can reuse those. But I've just got a piece of the tonic stuff which has a protective layer on, which you need to remember to take off. And then I think this should just about fit over there, yes. So I'm going to just trim a little bit off that end because we don't need quite so much over there. And that's just going to fit behind. If you don't have a thick acetate though, a regular, thinner kind of acetate will work perfectly. This is just what I had to hand. I just had a scrap of it next to me, so I thought I might as well use it. So we're just going to put adhesive all the way around the perimeter. I do prefer to use wet glue, but I know some people are really against using wet glue with acetate, but I think it still sticks really well. So I think maybe some people think because it's plastic on plastic it's not going to stay stuck, but then I feel like you can have that same problem with tape as well. So I do prefer to use wet glue because I want to get all of that detail with a little bit of glue on there. You do definitely want to make sure you try to tap off as much as you can so it doesn't squidge out onto the acetate, but you want that detail to be stuck, otherwise it can kind of lift and it doesn't look quite so nice. So I do prefer to use wet glue. And I'm just going to place the acetate onto there. If you're ever not sure that your acetate is going to stay stuck and you want to give it like a little bit of insurance that it's not going to come apart or anything, just take some regular sellotape and just catch that edge piece and stick it along there. And same down here, just to hold it into position. Just make sure you're not going into your aperture, but you can definitely do that to secure it into position. I often do that as well when I've been using microbeads and stuff in a shaker card, and maybe I feel like the foam tape hasn't quite like butted up against the edge, or maybe the piece of cardstock I've chosen to be the backing piece isn't quite covering the whole like well area that I've created with my double-sided tape. I often just stick a bit of sellotape over there so that nothing is going to escape out of there, especially when I'm using microbeads, because I feel like they're more likely to try and find a tiny little way to escape out of there. But anyway, we've got to this stage now, so we've got our aperture and we've got the acetate over the aperture pieces. Then we want to take our foam tape. So I'm going to use my 2mm foam tape, which is kind of like a regular thickness. The foam pads that Tonic do in their Craft Perfect range are 2mm thick as well. I do love using my 1mm, but I feel like for shaker cards you want to go to that 2mm depth, or you can even go 3mm if you're using more like seed beads or maybe larger micro beads or a lot of bits and pieces in there, or if you have die cut pieces in there. You know, sometimes when you get like a stamp club with the dies that coordinate with a stamped image, you might want to have them as little bits and pieces floating around in the shaker card, and in that instance you want to go slightly thicker than you normally would so they've got enough room to sort of move around. But I'm just going to go 2mm for this one, and let's do the side pieces first. So all I do is take foam tape. I prefer foam tape for shaker cards just because it's less effort, you know, having to just cut a skinnier piece of foam tape than having to cut foam squares into small little pieces or to take off hundreds of backing pieces and stuff. And for this shaker card we want to create two wells so we can have two different shaker bits in there. So to go up the central section you want to just take a skinnier piece of foam tape that will fit down that central piece really nicely so that we can actually divide them off and turn them into two separate shaker wells. Then you also want to cover the rest of the back of your panel with your foam tape too, so that nothing can escape, nothing's going to sag down. When you put it on your card, everything's going to be an even level. And then we also want to just fill in all of the other areas, making sure that these two wells are complete, continuous boundaries for anything that's going to be in there. You can see here I've got a little gap. I haven't got enough tape next to each other. You don't have to keep like putting a tiny little piece just in there. You can literally just take a block and put it across there as well. We're going to fill in some of this bit anyway because we don't want all of our shaker stuff falling down to the bottom and not being able to be seen. So we can take another piece and stick it here, and that's also making sure that that is sort of joined in there. And then we can also just put another piece along here so all of the leaves aren't going to completely disappear when the card's standing upright as well. On this side we want to make sure that that little piece is in a nice little boundary, and then we can also take a bit more of this foam tape and put it along here as well, snipping off any excess bits. It doesn't matter that there's a gap there because we know that this area is all filled in nicely, nothing's going to escape. I'm not going to use microbeads in this instance, so I know that any gaps just need to be smaller than my smallest bit of confetti, which is going to be the little hexagons, which aren't that small really, so that little space will be absolutely fine. Then we want to fill in the top of our little well. So you want to butt a piece in there. If it's too long, you can snip a little bit off. If you want to fill in that tiny little gap, if we were using microbeads, you would definitely want to do that. You can just then take a small little piece, stick it in there, and it fills in the little gap of that well. And then for the top piece of the card, we want there to be nice support up here as well. So I'm going to prioritise that first and put this piece along here and cut another little piece, maybe a bit smaller than that, to go in that corner there. And then we can just finish off closing in this well piece as well. So we can snip that down, butt that up against there. We've got a little gap there, so how do we sort that? We just take a little square of foam tape and put it on there, because it doesn't matter what this side of the card looks like. So don't feel like you have to get your foam tape perfectly, don't feel like you have to cut it into a skinny strip, take the backing off and like bend it around the aperture or anything. It doesn't matter what on earth this side looks like, because all we want to do is just make sure everything is contained, and you want to press it all down to make sure everything's in good contact. Then you can do one well at a time. I tend to prefer to take off all of the backing papers, because I feel like if I put my bits and pieces in here first and then I try to take the backing papers off, sometimes you can catch the panel and make it jump, and then all of your bits of confetti are going to jump around and stick onto all of the exposed bits that you've been taking off as you go. But I feel like if you take all of the pieces off first, you're less likely to kind of bump it and get that sort of thing happening. I just find that from experience, especially when you've got microbeads in there. I find it's really annoying when you bump it and the microbeads stick onto the foam, because then you have literally got to knock them all off, otherwise you're not going to get a seal around it. So we decided we were going to do the lighter colour, no we weren't, we were going to do the darker colour with the leaves on this side. So I'm going to take those golden Acer leaves and tip some of those into this side of the shaker. You don't want too many, because you still want to be able to see that background colour. You just want them to be a nice little accent and to, you know, have a nice coverage in there when you're shaking it or when it's flat down. And then you want to take your desired colour of cardstock. This piece is plenty big enough to go over here, but you don't want it to go into this aperture, because this wants to be a different colour backing with a different colour sort of confetti in there. So we're going to try and stick it along this line and then make sure that it just covers the rest of the well, and that gives perfect coverage. And we can flip this over if we want to test it, see what it looks like. And we've got all of those beautiful leaves inside that half of the shaker card. As you shake it more, they will sort of loosen up from each other and flow a little bit nicer. If you have microbeads, I do recommend microbeads. I do really love it when you put microbeads in, because they do help your confetti move around a little bit smoother, because they sort of help it roll around. They sort of get stuck on the microbeads and roll around. But you can see once you've shaken it a few times, they do loosen up and shake much nicer. And then we've still got this open side, which you could leave as an open side if you wanted to, but what we're going to do, what the whole tutorial is creating two different wells in your shaker card with different bits and pieces in them. So on this side we're going to go with the luminous lily pad hexagons, and we're just going to tip some of those in. These are much more of a translucent confetti anyway, and we are putting them behind a detailed kind of panel cutout. So you're not necessarily going to see that they're little hexagons in there, they're just going to give some interest behind the openings. And this piece of card that we've cut is plenty big enough as well, which is great. If it wasn't, and maybe it only came up to here and you felt like this little bit was exposed, you can just put a bit of sellotape over there like I was explaining before. But I did cut pieces big enough this time. And actually, when you're doing a double weld shaker card, this piece is going to overlap this piece, so you want to make sure you've got a little bit of adhesive on here to make sure that side of the cardstock is going to stick down nicely. Otherwise confetti and things could escape out of there. So you just want to make sure that you've got that fourth side nicely closed and adhered onto that piece of card. And then you can flip that over and see your finished shaker card. The only thing left to do now is to trim off that excess piece, which you can just undercut with your long bladed pair of scissors. then because we're going to keep working on this, there might be a little bit of exposed adhesive, so I just take the backing paper off of one of the pieces, put it back on there, just so it doesn't stick to my mat. But if you were worried about that, or you'd already chucked the pieces away, or there wasn't a big enough piece to put back on there, if you work on your easy clean mat that comes with your media mat, your adhesive will just peel straight off of that and you won't get your panel stuck. It does tend to stick quite well to the glass surface, so I do recommend putting it back onto there if you're going to still work on your glass mat. So we can put this beautiful decorative piece across the bottom, and then if we want to go with the same layout as before on the Hexagon version, we can put our sentiment down here, but we could also layer up our sentiment and put it in the centre of the heart if we wanted to, or across this side of the heart maybe. So I won't stick this down just yet. We'll go with the sentiment first, so that we can change our mind if we want to. So all I'm going to do is put some glue on the back of that one that we cut out with the little rectangle, and just put glue all over the little fragile areas. Tap off the excess, and then stick this over the top of the one that is still in the card. If you wanted to, you could line up the rectangle die back over the top of that and then cut the second piece with that die in position, or I tend to just trim with my scissors around the edge, and I find that works just as well, and it means you don't have to get your die cutting machine back out again, which is nice. So now you've got your perfect little double stacked sentiment, which just makes it a little bit more visible on your card. Then we've just got to decide what colours do we want to back it onto. Do we want to go the sea salt green first and then a little extra piece of the ginger, or do we want to go sea salt green and then some of the pistachio if we're going to put it up there? So let's put it on the sea salt green first, because I feel like that's going to be a good colour to have it on to begin with. And press that into position, and when I cut round it this time, I'm going to leave a tiny little border, just to give it that little accent of the colour around the edge. So I'm literally just leaving like a millimetre when I cut round this. Okay, so we've got our little sentiment there with our tiny sea salt green border. Then we've just got to make our minds up. Do we want our sentiment to be overlapping the middle? Do we want it to be over this side? Do we want it to be up there? Do we want it to be down here? And then what other colour do we want to accent it with? I quite like it being over there actually. And then we definitely need some more of that ginger, because that's the only ginger that's on this card. So we definitely need some more of that. So I reckon layering it onto that, and then possibly using a strip of ginger somewhere. Maybe we put the ginger behind there, and then maybe we mount that onto the pistachio then to bring that across up here, because we can't see it as much because it's behind that aperture. So maybe something more like that would look better. If we have, yeah, okay, let's stick this onto here. I thought this might be quite a good part of the tutorial to kind of show you how you can kind of decide the layout of your card, because I know sometimes it's a struggle to think, oh, I know the card needs something, but I'm not sure what it needs. It's often just trying to balance the colours that you've used that it needs, and sometimes it's difficult to know how to do that. Oftentimes like a sequin or a gem or something will be the perfect little addition, and you can literally just, you know, bung a few of them on and it sort of balances it across the card. But sometimes it's different die cuts that you want to use. Sorry, it went a little bit blurry just then. I think it's gone back crisp now. So I think I want to cut this right up to the edge of that detail. And then we might even want to add a little bit of sea salt green down here as well. But I feel like that, and then this, maybe even if we do this onto a tiny bit of the ginger first and leave a tiny little border again, and then do a bigger piece of the pistachio. I just feel like we really need to, maybe I will take that little skinny edge off of there, and we will make that skinny edge a little tiny bit of the ginger pie rather than the sea salt. I think maybe that would work really nicely. And we can just stick this straight onto there. You can use tape if you want to. I've just got my glue to hand, so I thought I'd just use that. And then we can just cut a tiny little 1mm border just to tie that colour back in again. And then we could leave it just like that, but I think bringing in some of that pistachio is really going to round it off nicely. So I'm going to do that, and we'll leave a slightly bigger border of pistachio. And trim around this again, maybe double the amount of pistachio showing around the edge. This is a good kind of card to make with your scrap cardstock as well, because you might just have enough bits and pieces of different colours of cardstock to create something like this. Now we've got to decide, do we have that overlapping slightly? Do we have it off to one side completely? Do we like this? Do we want it to be nothing down there? I like it with and without, to be honest. Maybe you could even do it diagonally to make it look different. Maybe it needs a tiny little skinny strip of the sea salt green down there. So with these little skinny strips that I tend to like to put on my cards, I just take my guillotine and make sure I know where there's a straight edge. I usually cut off the first tiny little bit and discard that just in case it has got like a bend in it or something from wherever it's been stored. And then I just move it along, cut a random skinny strip. And sometimes that can also really make a card, and it just balances the colours again as well. I do find that that is a good little thing to do. So do we think like that? We could do it without this. We could have just that little skinny strip along the bottom. Do we need this decorative piece? Do we have it hanging off the bottom and put a little strip across there? Do we do it diagonally to balance that pattern that's on there? Diagonally would make it look really different, wouldn't it? Let's go diagonally, because that's not usually something, well, I do go diagonally quite a lot, but with this kind of a card I would usually just leave it blank down there, I think, or maybe do a white on white kind of detail. So let's show something a little bit different and put that on like that. And then this tiny little skinny strip. With these skinny strips as well, if you don't like using wet glue in a fine tip bottle, put some double-sided tape on the back of your card before you cut it, and then you'll have the adhesive on the back of there for you to just peel off and stick that on as well. Then I think for the sentiment, I'm going to go back to a 1mm foam tape and raise that up a little bit. So probably about that wide. And trim a little bit off the end, and then stick that onto there. And I do like it just on that half of the card, I think. And then just trim off these pieces now the glue has dried a little bit. A bit thicker to cut through that piece because we've got two bits on top of each other. And there we go, we've got a slightly different kind of design with that diagonal coming across. I really like how that turned out. So then literally all you need to do is stick it onto your card blank. So we've got a little bit of the double-sided foam tape left on the back of there. And then we can also just come in with some normal double-sided tape just to make the back of these sort of backing pieces to our shaker wells sticky as well. So we're going to get a nice strong bond. This will also help secure everything and make sure that nothing comes loose and falls out of your shaker card over time as well. Okay, and then line it up onto the card blank. And there we've got our split well sort of shaker card. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial video. I haven't done a tutorial on a shaker card yet, I don't think. I'm pretty sure I haven't, but I thought this would be a nice one to show, doing a split one. You definitely don't have to do it as a split one, you could just do it as a big square behind there and the same stuff can shake behind both of them. But I do love doing these kind of cards. I have shown, I think it was with my snow globe up close video, I showed how I had created No, maybe it wasn't the snow globe. Maybe it was the festive mason jars. Anyway, it was one video a while back and I showed 5 little trees in a row and how to create a different shaker well behind each of them, just within an up close kind of video. So if you wanted that in more detail, then hopefully this video has kind of done that for you. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to look out for the up close video. It should have gone up yesterday on my channel. But just in case you haven't seen it, you can go and check that out for more details of all of the dies that are in the die set and what the die set actually creates as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!